today attribute the spectacular successes of the Gulen movement in social, educational and other activities to the ideas of Fethullah Gulen. I think there has been an overemphasis on the ideas. I think it is other things that make this movement rather unique. No doubt, Fethullah Gulen is a very charismatic person. And I think the charismatic character is important, is an important part of the movement, is an important part of what makes people feel strong dedication to the movement. It may also help to understand why certain people are wondering what will happen when Gulen is no longer there. What will happen to the movement? Will it still remain the same movement? Will it fall apart? Will it be able to continue? I would make a strong guess that it will be able to continue, because I think it is not even the charisma that is basic to the current successes, it is something else. Charisma I see as a relationship between a leader and his followers. It is not something that is inherent in the leader, but it is an interaction between a leader and his following. And as the anthropologist Peter Worsley once remarked in a study of charismatic leaders of millenarian movements, when you study a movement that has a charismatic leader, it is very tempting to focus on the leader, who is spectacular, who is in view, about whom everyone speaks, but beside the leader there is usually a figure who is much less grey, less spectacular, who remains in the shadow, but who is the real organizer of the movement. I think this is true of many charismatic movements. I think this is also true of the Gulen movement. I think there is an element of organization that is not all that easily seen, but it is essential to understanding the success of the movement. Organization. Another aspect is fundraising, but I believe that another speaker will speak about that aspect. And the third, I would say, discipline. And I think discipline, the way a movement disciplines its members and makes them into people who voluntarily carry out Hizmet, is extremely important. And therefore I shall make a comparison with another movement that, like the Gulen movement, on the one hand is a deeply religious movement, but that is engaged in activities that more and more are secular. So there is a movement that induces a strongly religious dedication, but the action that comes out of this religious attitude is secular. Now, we've seen many Islamic movements in the past decades turn into social work, as, say, Christian missionary movements from converting heathens or peoples of other religions to Christianity shifted their emphasis to developmental work, charity, relief work and so on. We see that more and more Islamic charities rooted in Islamic political or cultural movements take an important role where the state recedes. This goes perhaps together with the phase of neoliberalism in which we live. The state increasingly gives up its social functions and leaves them to civil society, and religious movements move into there and carry out healthcare, poverty relief, and all sorts of development. Now, the movement that is perhaps most visibly successful in this worldwide, the transnational movement, is the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood is a movement of da'wah, religious propagation, da'wah through preaching, but increasingly through good works, through education, through having professionals dedicating themselves to helping the poor, the marginalized. A movement that establishes Islamic charities. The Muslim Brotherhood, the Ikhwan al-Muslimun, are organized in a large number of countries, not only Arabic-speaking countries, also in others. And in every country, the movement is rather different from its peers in other countries. It is very well capable of adapting itself to local circumstances. This is one thing that you have in the Gulen movement, which also does so. I I will take as an example a non-Arabic speaking branch of the Islam, of the Ikhwan, the Indonesian branch, which is currently organized as a political party, the PKS, the Party for Keadilan, and Welfare, which began as a student movement. Some people might say a second generation student movement, a movement that emerged at a time when the Suharto regime had clamped down on politics on the campus. In the late 70s, politics was banned from the campus. The only thing that students were allowed to do were religious things, that they were deemed to be less dangerous. In the 80s, we see that people coming back from the Middle East, where they had studied, start organizing study groups, halqa, where people were reading together texts from important figures of the Muslim Brotherhood, Al-Banna, Sayyid Qutb, As-Sibari from the Syrian, Sayyid Hawa, and other people of that inspiration. These study groups, often called Usra, family, were groups where people would monitor one another, they would help one another when there were problems, they would keep control of each other's morality, they exercised a fair, sometimes even an unfair amount of social control over the private lives of the members. There was usually one member who was a little bit more senior, who was called the Murabi, the trainer or the discipliner. And we find that there is a hierarchy of Murabi of various levels. So at the grassroots level we have these groups, people who are considered to have the right attitude and the right amount of interest, the right abilities are selected to raise to a higher level. You get a rather hierarchical, but loosely hierarchical movement, in which you have various levels of membership, various levels of Murabi, of trainers. Within this movement we see, which is what the original Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood adapted from the Communist Party, out of fear of being rolled up by the police, you see certain cells that having a specific function. So, for instance, for running, writing in and distributing a journal, there is one cell that does all this. There's another cell that does another journal. Sometimes the two cells have no communication, sometimes they're even in competition. There are cells organizing students, there are cells trying to reach other segments of the population. There are cells setting up relief organizations, charities, and so on. The aim of the movement, the ultimate aim of the movement is a political one. It is the Islamization of society and the state. But the aim is to do this from the bottom up. So, this sounds very Christian to me. Improve the world and start with yourself is a saying that I learned as a child. This is what they do. They are creating, the idea is to create an Islamic personality, Shakhsiyya Islamiyya. Only when you have Islamic personalities you can go on. You have Islamic families, and then from the Islamic family you go to the Islamic community, and ultimately society will be pervaded by Islamic morality. And then, without any revolution, suddenly the state will reflect society, will also be an Islamic state in which God's will is enacted, enshrined in the laws. This is the idea. Now, in order to create this Islamic personality, there are the disciplining practices which I think are at the core of this movement. And the disciplining practices are practices that must be familiar to practicing Muslims all over. Only they are carried out in a more systematic and controlled way. So, sleeping is decreased. You don't sleep 9-10 hours, now you sleep as little as possible. At least once a week, and preferably more often, you rise in the night for the tahajjud prayer. You fast on Mondays and Thursdays. Again, very traditional. Many Islamic movements do that. Traditional Muslims all over the world do this. In this movement, it is obligatory, as a form of self-disciplining. Every day after the subh prayer, after the morning prayer, you dedicate around an hour to reading the Quran. You should also set aside much time in the day to read texts belonging to the movement. Besides these spiritual disciplining practices, there's also physical practices. You have to do sports, you have to carry out sports. Because only a healthy body can nourish a healthy spirit. These practices together, they create the disposition that makes a person into a proper Islamic personality, inclined to hard work, and inclined to perceive all success in his worldly endeavors as a sign that he has pleased God. Now this in Indonesia has been a movement of a generation. People who came in the universities in the 80s and 90s, became university graduates, started getting into the institutions, into ministries, became teachers, went into enterprises, became businessmen and so on. And they all have something, when you see them on the street you almost recognize them. This is because in the first place there are the external signs. If they're men they have a little beard, very well trimmed, not a wild beard like the Salafis, but just a symbol of a beard. There is something shining from their face. They look very clean, they look really different from the average Indonesian. They dress in a specific way, which is also recognizable. It's the way in which modernists, as opposed to traditionalist Muslims, dress. They wouldn't wear a shirt like I do. Normally it would be a white shirt, no tie, preferably not this, but a thing that reminds me of priests. They are also convinced that they will be able to replace the corrupt older generation who are physically corrupt, who have made a mess of this country, that they will be able to clean up the whole mess and make Indonesia a better country. They are confident in their abilities, they're all very highly educated, and they feel that they will clean up Indonesian society and they will turn it into a better and a more godly, more pious society. So when after the fall of Suharto these people established a political party, you get an interesting phenomenon. They engage in politics. They have a political party that I would dare to say is the only proper Indonesian political party with a proper program. And it has a very interesting program for an Islam-based political party. The program, for instance, says that on gender, it has a very explicit paragraph on gender. Equality between men and women is endorsed, unless explicitly in conflict with God's orders. So there may be certain conditions given by the Quran or Hadith in which this equality should not be, but otherwise full equality. There's another statement about minorities, religious minorities. Non-Muslims and Muslims have equal rights according to the party, except, this is the same writer, except when it explicitly contradicts God's orders. The term Sharia is not used in the program, and outsiders fear that this party is out to bring the Sharia to Indonesia. They do want to bring the Sharia to Indonesia, but perhaps their understanding of what the Sharia is a different one from the one of their opponents. Opponents usually think of cutting off hands and forcing women to wear headscarves as an important element of the Sharia, and the punishments for flogging, for illicit sexual activities. They tend to think of the Sharia as basically a system of rules of fairness and equality. But they don't use the term Sharia. They prefer not to term in order not to provoke others. You see that the movement from principles in the past years has become more pragmatic. It not only opposes the existing political system, which currently is one of liberal democracy, but it takes part in it. And in taking part in the system, the movement has gradually been changed by the system. Being partners, you accept and you incorporate, you become to embody some of the liberal democratic values, as I see that they are doing.